The day my father died, my brother Daniel cried harder than anyone else in the room. At least, that's what everyone believed. The funeral home was packed. Neighbors, old friends, distant relatives who hadn't called my father in years. People filled every row dressed in black, speaking in soft voices as if grief had a volume limit. I sat in the second row beside my husband, Mark. My daughter Emma was on my left. My son Tyler sat quietly beside her. Neither of them said much. They loved their grandfather. Not because he spoiled them, not because he bought them expensive gifts, because he listened. And in our family, listening was rare. At the front of the room stood my brother Daniel, 48 years old, tall, confident, perfectly dressed, the golden child, the favorite, the son my father had always imagined taking over everything. When the service ended, Daniel hugged people, accepted condolences, and thanked everyone for coming. He looked devastated. But I noticed something. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the lawyer standing near the entrance, Mr. Calloway, Dad's estate attorney, the man carrying a thick leather folder, the will. Daniel wasn't thinking about Dad. Daniel was thinking about what came next. And honestly, so was everyone else. Because my father wasn't just a retired farmer. He owned nearly 400 acres of Kentucky land, a mansion worth over $2 million, several investment accounts, a commercial property in town, and enough money that family members who hadn't visited him in years suddenly found reasons to attend his funeral. Funny how that works. Death reveals character. Money reveals even more. 3 hours later, 21 family members sat inside Mr. Calloway's conference room. The atmosphere felt different now. Less sadness, more anticipation. My mother sat beside Daniel. As always, she had spent 49 years treating him like royalty. That wasn't bitterness speaking, it was fact. When Daniel got a C in school, Dad bought him a dirt bike. When I graduated at the top of my class, Dad shook my hand and told me to stay humble. Daniel was celebrated. I was appreciated. There's a difference. A big one. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, opened the folder, and began reading. For the first 20 minutes, everything happened exactly as everyone expected. Charity donations, small gifts, personal items, family heirlooms. Then came the real estate. Daniel sat straighter. My mother smiled. Everyone knew what was coming. My residence located at 811 Harper Ridge Road, the lawyer paused, shall transfer in full ownership to my son, Daniel Parker. Nobody looked surprised. The mansion, $2 million. Gone, just like that. Several relatives nodded approvingly. One uncle whispered, "That's exactly what Arthur would have wanted." Daniel lowered his head modestly, but I caught the smile, the tiny one, the one he thought nobody saw. The lawyer continued. Investment accounts, commercial property, farm equipment, vintage truck collection, all Daniel. Every major asset, Daniel. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. By this point, my mother looked proud enough to burst. Then the lawyer turned another page. The room grew quiet. To my daughter, Sarah Parker. Every eye shifted toward me. For one brief moment, I wondered. Maybe there was something. Maybe Dad remembered all those hospital visits, the grocery runs, the weekends I spent repairing things around his property after Daniel moved to Nashville and got too busy. Maybe that mattered. Maybe. The lawyer cleared his throat. I leave the structure known as Building 7. Silence. I frowned. Building 7? A few relatives exchanged confused looks. Then realization hit. The shed. Not a house, not land, not investments, not money, a shed. An old, locked storage shed near the eastern fence line. The kind of structure most people would bulldoze without thinking twice. The lawyer continued. Ownership includes the shed and approximately 2 surrounding acres. That was it. 2 acres, 1 shed. Nothing else. For 3 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then my cousin laughed, loudly. Others joined. Even Daniel shook his head. You've got to be kidding. My face burned, but I stayed quiet. Years of family gatherings had taught me that skill. Never react when people expect you to. Daniel leaned toward me. Hey, Sarah. His grin widened. I'll give you 10 grand for it right now. More laughter. $10,000 for my entire inheritance. My husband squeezed my hand under the table. I knew he was angry, but he stayed silent. The lawyer raised his hand. There is one additional instruction. The room grew quiet immediately. Daniel rolled his eyes, probably expecting some sentimental note. The lawyer unfolded a handwritten page. His expression changed slightly. He looked surprised. Then he began reading. Sarah. My heart stopped. Dad's words, written in his own hand. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. Silence filled the room. Everyone will tell you to sell the shed. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Dad continued. Don't. Now even Daniel looked interested. The lawyer kept reading. Wait 5 years. The room froze. I blinked. 5 years? Dad's note continued. No matter what anyone offers. My pulse quickened. Trust your judgment. The lawyer paused, then read the final sentence. One day, they'll understand why. Love, Dad. The room remained silent. Then Daniel laughed again. Harder this time. That's insane. Several relatives agreed. 5 years? For a worthless shed? My mother shook her head. Arthur always had a strange sense of humor. The lawyer folded the note carefully. But something bothered me. Dad wasn't a joke person. Not like that. If he wrote those words, he meant them. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Outside the building, people formed small groups discussing inheritances. Daniel stood in the center of attention, everyone congratulating him, everyone praising him, the new king of the family. My mother approached me in the parking lot. Her expression carried a familiar disappointment. You should sell it. The shed? Of course. It's what Dad left me. She sighed. As a courtesy. There it was, the same assumption everyone had, that Dad left me something small because I mattered less. Maybe they were right. Maybe not. I'll think about it. My mother nodded, then immediately walked back toward Daniel, the important child, the chosen one. Some stories never change, at least not right away. 3 days later, I drove out to the property alone. The mansion stood proudly on the western side. Beautiful, massive, expensive. Daniel's new kingdom. The shed sat nearly a mile away on the eastern edge, hidden behind trees, forgotten, neglected, almost invisible. Maybe that was fitting. I parked nearby and stepped out. The structure looked terrible. Weathered wood, rusted metal roof, faded paint. A heavy steel lock hung from the front door. Dad had always kept it locked. Always. As kids, Daniel and I weren't allowed inside. Whenever we asked why, Dad gave the same answer. Some things aren't ready to be seen yet. At the time, we thought he was being mysterious. Now, I wasn't so sure. I stood staring at the building, thinking about the note. Wait 5 years, no matter what anyone offers. Why? The question wouldn't leave me alone. I walked around the structure slowly, examining every wall, every window, every inch. Then I noticed something. Fresh tire tracks. I frowned. Nobody should have been there. The property technically belonged to me now, yet somebody had visited recently, very recently. I followed the tracks. They circled behind the shed, then disappeared into the woods. Strange. Very strange. That night I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous, just unfinished, like Dad had left behind a puzzle, and somehow I had only seen the first piece. The next morning my phone rang. Daniel. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Hello? Hey, sis. His voice sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. I've been thinking. That was never a good sign. What about? The shed. Of course. What about it? I'll give you $25,000. I sat upright. Why? A brief pause, then laughter. Because it's useless and I feel bad. Lie. Daniel never felt bad, especially for me. I'll pass. Silence. Then, 50,000. My heart skipped. Now I knew something important. Nobody offers $50,000 for a worthless shed. I stared out the kitchen window, thinking hard. Dad's note echoed in my mind. No matter what anyone offers, trust your judgment. One day they'll understand why. Slowly, I smiled, for the first time since the funeral, because suddenly I wasn't wondering what Dad left me. I was wondering what Daniel already knew. And for the first time in our lives, my brother looked nervous. The first thing I did after hanging up on Daniel was call the county records office. Not because I had a plan, because I had a question. And questions have always bothered me until I find answers, especially when people start offering $50,000 for something they're pretending is worthless. The woman at the records office sounded bored. I gave her the parcel number from the inheritance paperwork. There was a long pause while she searched, then another, then another. Finally, she said something strange. That's odd. My grip tightened on the phone. What is? The property history. What about it? Another pause. It's incomplete. I frowned. What does that mean? It means records are missing. Missing? Some were removed decades ago and never digitized. Now I was interested, very interested. Can I see them? If we can find them. When I hung up, my instincts were screaming. Dad's note, Daniel's offer, missing records. None of it felt random anymore. Something was hiding beneath the surface, and I intended to find it. That weekend, I drove back to the shed, this time with a flashlight, a ladder, and determination. The building looked exactly the same. Old, forgotten, worthless, at least on the outside. Inside, dust covered everything. Old shelves, broken tools, boxes nobody had opened in years. I spent almost 4 hours searching. Nothing. No secret rooms, no hidden cache, no treasure maps. Just junk. By sunset, I felt ridiculous. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe Dad simply lost perspective near the end. Maybe the shed meant something emotionally, not financially. I was about to leave when I noticed something. A date carved into one of the support beams. Beneath it were initials. J.P. My grandfather, James Parker, the man who originally built the structure. I ran my fingers across the carving, thinking. Then I remembered something, a story Grandpa used to tell, over and over, about how some things are worth more underground than above it. At the time, I thought he meant tree roots. Now I wasn't so sure. 2 weeks later, the records office called. We found something. I drove there immediately. The clerk handed me an old folder. The documents were yellow with age, fragile, forgotten, exactly the kind of thing nobody looks at anymore. I opened the file. The first pages were ordinary: property surveys, boundary maps, tax records. Then I saw it. A document dated 1962. My grandfather's signature sat at the bottom, alongside several state officials, and one phrase highlighted in red: Mineral Rights Agreement. My pulse quickened. I kept reading, then read it again, then a third time, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The shed property wasn't just 2 acres. The mineral rights attached to it extended beneath almost 300 acres, including part of the land under the mansion. I stared at the page, speechless. The ownership wasn't separated by surface property. It followed the original mineral deed, and somehow, through a legal technicality from 60 years earlier, those rights belonged to whoever owned the shed. Me. I drove home in a daze. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I called an attorney, then another, then a third. All 3 confirmed the same thing. The document was legitimate. The rights were mine. Every single one of them. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the paperwork, trying to understand why Dad never told anyone. Then I remembered. Maybe he did. Maybe Daniel knew. Maybe that's why he wanted the shed so badly. 3 days later, my phone rang again. Daniel. I answered. Hello? 100,000. No greeting, no small talk, straight to business. I smiled. What? The shed. I almost laughed. You've doubled your offer? It's a fair price. For a worthless building? Silence. Then, don't be difficult. There it was, the real Daniel, the version that appeared whenever he didn't get what he wanted. I'll pass. His voice hardened. Sarah. No, Daniel. I interrupted. I think I'm starting to understand. And then I hung up. 2 months later, everything changed. An energy company arrived. Not at my house, at Daniel's. Apparently, they wanted permission to conduct geological testing on part of the property. Daniel agreed immediately. He expected a huge payout. The mansion sat directly over one of the richest natural gas formations in the region, at least according to preliminary studies. There was just one problem. The energy company couldn't finalize anything because Daniel didn't own the mineral rights. I did. The call came on a Thursday morning, a representative from the energy company. Polite, professional, interested, very interested. We'd like to discuss a lease agreement. I nearly dropped my coffee. Excuse me? The mineral rights beneath your property. My property? Yes, ma'am. I stared out the window, heart pounding. What exactly are they worth? There was a pause. Then he said a number. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. Could you repeat that? He did. $4.8 million. Initial estimate. Potentially more. I sat there in complete silence, because suddenly everything made sense. Dad's note. 5 years. Trust your instincts. One day they'll understand why. He knew. Somehow he knew. News travels fast in small towns, especially when millions of dollars are involved. By Monday, everyone knew. By Tuesday, my mother called. For the first time in weeks. Sarah. Her voice sounded unusually warm. I almost laughed. Hi, Mom. We should have dinner. Interesting. Very interesting. The last time she'd suggested dinner was 8 months earlier, right before she needed a favor. I'm busy. Silence. Then, family is important. Of course it was. Now that millions were involved. The next visitor arrived 2 days later. Daniel, in person. His expensive truck pulled into my driveway just before sunset. He stepped out carrying a bottle of wine, like we were old friends, like years of being ignored never happened. I invited him inside, mostly because I wanted answers. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my kids did homework every night, the same table where I'd paid bills for 20 years, the same table where nobody in my family had ever bothered visiting before. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Good. So, I folded my arms. What do you want? He sighed. You know what I want. The shed? The rights. There it was. Honesty, finally. I nodded slowly. When did you know? His eyes narrowed. What? When did you know? Silence. Then, Dad told me years ago. My stomach dropped. I knew it. I absolutely knew it. How many years? 7. 7 years. Dad told him 7 years earlier. Daniel looked down, unable to meet my eyes. He said someday it might be worth something. I laughed. A cold laugh. Not a happy one. And you never mentioned it? No. You offered $10,000. Nothing. Then 50. Still nothing. Finally, he whispered, I thought you'd sell. That hurt more than I expected, because he wasn't talking about the shed. He was talking about me. He genuinely believed I'd fold, like I always had before, like I always had to. Then he said something that surprised me. Mom knew too. The room went completely silent. I stared at him, certain I'd heard wrong. What? His voice barely rose above a whisper. Mom knew. The betrayal hit harder than anything else, harder than the inheritance, harder than the laughter, harder than the lies, because suddenly decades of favoritism made sense. They never intended for me to have it. Not really. They expected me to give it away, to Daniel, like everything else. I stood, walked to the window and looked out at the fading sunlight, trying to process it. Behind me, Daniel spoke again. You could still sell. I laughed, actually laughed, then turned around. No. His face hardened. You'd rather destroy this family? Destroy this family. Interesting choice of words, because from where I stood, the family had been destroying itself for decades. I was simply the first person who stopped helping. Daniel left shortly after that, angry, frustrated, desperate. And for the first time in our lives, power had shifted. The golden child wasn't winning anymore, and he didn't know how to handle it. But neither of us realized something. The biggest secret wasn't the mineral rights, not even close, because 2 weeks later, while reviewing Grandpa's original documents, my attorney discovered a second hidden clause, a clause nobody had noticed for more than 60 years, a clause that would change everything, not just for Daniel, not just for my mother, for the entire Parker family. And when we finally understood what Grandpa had done, the fight over $4.8 million suddenly looked very small. The lawyer arrived at exactly 9 a.m. Not alone. 2 accountants came with him, and a woman from the state records office. The moment I saw them, I knew this wasn't a simple meeting. Something bigger was happening, much bigger. My brother, Jason, apparently felt the same way, because for the first time since Dad's funeral, he looked nervous. Not angry, not arrogant, nervous. The conference room felt unusually quiet. The lawyer placed 3 thick folders on the table. Then he looked directly at me. Emma, before we begin, I need to ask you a question. I nodded. What question? Have you opened the final envelope your father left you? My stomach tightened. The envelope. The one hidden inside Grandpa's toolbox. The one Dad specifically instructed me not to open until today. Slowly, I reached into my purse. The room watched. Jason leaned forward. My mother looked confused. The lawyer smiled slightly. Please open it now. I broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Dad's handwriting. The same neat handwriting I'd known my entire life. Suddenly, my eyes blurred, because it felt like hearing his voice again. I began reading. Emma, if you're reading this, then everything happened exactly the way I expected. The room became completely silent. Right now, Jason probably believes he inherited everything. Jason's face changed immediately. And right now, you probably believe I left you almost nothing. My hands trembled. Neither of those things is true. I looked up. The lawyer nodded. Keep reading. For years, I watched people misunderstand value. They saw money. I saw character. They saw houses. I saw responsibility. They saw ownership. I saw stewardship. My throat tightened, because those words sounded exactly like Dad. The land your grandfather built was never meant to be sold, not because it was valuable today, but because it would become valuable tomorrow. I looked toward the lawyer. He opened one of the folders. Inside were maps, dozens of maps. Dad's letter continued. 10 years ago, geological surveys discovered something beneath the eastern acreage. The room froze. Jason blinked. What? The lawyer raised a hand. Please let her finish. The reports remained confidential. Most people never knew they existed. But I knew, and now you need to know too. My heartbeat became louder, almost deafening. The eastern acreage contains one of the largest lithium deposits in the region. Silence. Absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even Jason looked stunned. The lawyer finally spoke. The survey was confirmed 18 months ago. He opened another folder. Inside were official reports, contracts, valuations, government documents. My mother stared. What does that mean? The lawyer answered calmly. It means the eastern property is worth substantially more than the mansion. Jason's face went pale. How much more? Someone asked. The accountant looked at his paperwork, then quietly said, current estimated value exceeds $47 million. The room exploded. What? That's impossible. 47 million? My mother nearly dropped her purse. Jason stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. No. His voice sounded desperate. No, that's impossible. But it wasn't. The documents were real. Every single one. Then I continued reading Dad's letter. If Jason is angry, tell him I understand. Everyone looked toward my brother. His face had turned completely white. But Jason spent his life wanting quick rewards. You spent your life building things slowly. That difference matters. The room became quiet again. I didn't leave you the eastern acreage because it was worth more. I left it to you because I trusted you more. Those words hit me harder than the money ever could. Because for years I had wondered, questioned, doubted. Did Dad really see me? Did he understand me? Now I knew. He had, the entire time.
Tears filled my eyes. I kept reading. You visited when nobody else did. You helped when nobody was watching. You showed up when there was nothing to gain. Character reveals itself in ordinary moments, and yours never failed. I couldn't speak for several seconds. Neither could anyone else. Then came the final paragraph. The paragraph that changed everything. Real wealth isn't what people inherit. It's who they become before the inheritance arrives. If this property makes you rich, that's fine. But if it changes who you are, then I've failed. Stay the woman you've always been. Love, Dad. I slowly lowered the letter. The room remained silent. Even Jason. Especially Jason. The lawyer cleared his throat. There is one final matter. Everyone looked at him. The mineral rights were placed inside a family trust. Jason immediately looked hopeful again. Then the lawyer continued. The trust's sole managing trustee is Emma. Hope disappeared from his face, completely. For the next hour, lawyers explained details. Contracts, royalties, development plans, revenue projections. The numbers sounded unreal. Millions, then tens of millions, then potentially more. I stopped listening, because, strangely, the money wasn't what occupied my mind. Dad's letter was. After the meeting ended, everyone slowly left, one by one, until only Jason and I remained. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he finally said, "He trusted you." I nodded. "Yes." Jason stared at the table. "He never trusted me." I shook my head. "That's not true." His eyes met mine. "Then why?" The question sounded genuine, for the first time in his life. No arrogance, no entitlement, just honesty. I thought carefully before answering. Then I said, "Because he spent years giving you opportunities." Jason stayed silent. "And he spent years watching what you did with them." The truth hurt, but it was still the truth. For a long moment, Jason stared out the window. Then he laughed quietly. Not a happy laugh, a sad one. "I spent 20 years believing I was winning." I nodded. "I know." "And the whole time," his voice cracked, "the whole time he was measuring something completely different?" I didn't answer, because he already understood. Over the next 2 years, everything changed. The trust generated income. The property developed responsibly. The community benefited. Jobs were created. Scholarships were funded. Small businesses grew. Families stayed. The wealth spread beyond our family, exactly as Dad would have wanted. My mother changed too. Age has a way of forcing honesty. One evening, she sat beside me on the porch, the same porch where Dad used to drink coffee, and she quietly said, "I spent years praising the wrong things." I looked at her. She wiped away tears. "I thought success looked like confidence." She smiled sadly, but it actually looked like kindness. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. Jason eventually rebuilt his life, not through inheritance, not through shortcuts, through work, real work, for the first time ever. And strangely enough, he became happier. Because when people stop pretending to be important, they finally become useful. 5 years later, a reporter asked me a question. One question, the same question everyone always asked. If your father could see everything now, what do you think he'd say? I smiled, then looked across the land everyone once underestimated, the land nobody wanted, the land that changed everything. And I answered honestly. I think he'd ask a different question. The reporter looked confused. What question?
I smiled. Not what we inherited. I looked toward the horizon. Who we became because of it. And that's the thing most people never understand. The mansion wasn't the real inheritance. The mineral rights weren't the real inheritance. The money wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was being trusted, being believed in, being seen when nobody else saw your worth. And sometimes that turns out to be worth far more than millions.